What's up, humans? Welcome to the Human Music Podcast. I'm Luke Rain. My co-hosts are Tesco and Rip Kinney, and we're all music producers, artists, and producer coaches. This show is where we discuss all things music production and interview amazing creatives about their origins, their process, and whatever else comes up. This week is episode 113, Random Producer Advice. There's all sorts of things you need to know as a producer, but some of them are random little bits of advice that get lost in the sauce. We've got a list of those gems that we wish we knew sooner, that we want you to know now, like what is MIDI Jitter, why you should flatten tracks to audio, how to avoid pops and clicks, when, why, and how to use oversampling, when and how to use linear versus natural phase modes on Pro Q, and unlinking the stereo on Soothe and other plugins. We've also got some Ableton specific tricks like how to not max your CPU, how to see all your automation lanes, why Complex Pro Warp Mode has an envelope control, and how to use sampler and beats play forward and stop warp mode to control your drum tails. Yeah, we're getting nerdy today, y'all. The song of the week is Rip Kinney's I'm Okay Alone. That if you're listening to this the day it comes out, that's going to be a pre-save link. So please go pre-save that. If you're listening to this past June 23rd, 2022, that song's going to be out. So make sure you go bump it. Show your friends. Rip Kinney is killing it. All his releases are sounding so good these days. So go support your boy as he supports you by giving you all this dope producer advice for your day. Also check out our Song of the Week Spotify playlist. That will be at the top of it this week and slowly move down as we add songs every single week from us and our guests. You can support our sponsors, Dojo TV, that's free producer live stream classes from the Dojo Senseis, Tesco's Patreon, where you can get access to the private Discord track, feedback, and lessons. The weekly download, where you can learn from Il Gates and his private weekly group lessons and get access to damn near 300 episodes in the archive for just $20 a month, and guest practices, where you can learn from Seth Drake at the Approach Institute. He's the best engineer we know, and your first class is for free. There's more episodes, socials, and free sound packs at thehumanmusicpodcast.com, but let's get on into this episode about random producer advice.
Hello, people of Earth. This is Tesco with Rip Kenny and Trap Jesus, and you're listening to the Human Music Podcast. Woo!
Human Music Podcast. I like it. What's up, human? Welcome. Sounds like a giraffe's dying over there.
How's it going, everybody from this planet?
Have returned.
What is good? What is not good?
I don't even know, man. I don't even want to get into what's not good on this planet. People.
Today we get into state affairs.
Let's get into the what's good. And one of the things that's good is when you get good advice on how to produce records better.
True.
And we give a lot of that advice in these like long form podcasts where you go 45 minutes, an hour, maybe longer, just about one topic. But my guy Rip Kinney had a really good idea to do a podcast about little random shit that might not fit into just rando producer advice 101. And I can't think of a goddamn thing off top, so I'm gonna let you start, bruh, and you get the ball rolling and inspire me to say some shit.
So it's funny, like there's just like a lot of shit that like working in the DAW, like as many hours as I have lately, like you just like randomly stumble across. And I'm sure that, so I've just started making a list. I have like 10 things that are just small, tiny little boosts that make stuff sound 1% better or whatever. But it's stuff you need to know and stuff that I wish someone told me. And if I knew, it would have been cool. So I'm just going to run through this list, and I'm sure this list will spark other shit that you guys have learned.
And tangents.
And tangents. And it's all for the peoples. It's all for you listening. I'm sure, especially if you use Ableton, this shit is going to be really helpful. So just starting at the top of the list. So everyone knows, okay, well, actually, maybe not everyone knows. When you're finishing a project, what you should do is freeze and flatten all of your tracks to audio or bounce in place or whatever it is in your DAW, so that all of the synths and instruments and shit you had were like that are now actually just audio. And even down to like something as simple as like a sub that has no reverb that should just end exactly on the MIDI note, right? Well, it doesn't. And you never actually know that until you freeze it and you flatten it. Like even if you just opened up Serum, turned on the sub, and just used that for your sub patch, that envelope has a 15 millisecond release. And if you do it shorter than that, it clicks. So don't do it shorter than that. The solution is to freeze it and then chop off that 15 seconds whenever it matters. AKA if you have a kick or a snare happening right where that sub note cuts off, like you got to go in there and you got to chop it off. But the reason this is better than just like turning the release down or whatever is because you can get rid of those pops. You can get rid of the having the release at 0 creates a pop when like the basically the phase of that sub like is at, you know, between -1 and +1, and then all of a sudden it's off and your speaker like snaps to 0 and that creates a pop. You don't want that in your music, obviously. So you freeze and you flatten and you get rid of that. Now, what I actually learned is that in Ableton specifically, if you freeze something and then it has the frozen part and then that other clip that says freeze in parentheses tail, I believe, like they're two separate clips, and the tail is normally, and it doesn't always happen like this, but sometimes there's two separate clips where the remainder of the stuff that wasn't the MIDI note that you had exists, and you just like highlight that clip and delete it, right? Well, actually, it doesn't create a fade at the end of that clip unless you delete like a portion of that clip, right? So assuming in Ableton you have create fades at clip edges turned on and you just delete that freeze tail, it'll still actually make a pop. And I didn't realize this. I've been fucking this up forever until recently. It's just one of those things you like randomly hear and you're like, wait, I just deleted that. If it's two separate clips and you just get rid of one, it doesn't actually create that fade. So you have to like expand the clip and then delete a section of that clip. I don't know if this is really making sense here entirely, but what you need to know is that if there's a freeze tail that's a separate clip of audio and the freeze portion, don't just delete the tail. You have to drag it out and then delete the part that you don't want because it'll automatically create a fade, or you have to zoom in and actually create a fade on it if you don't want that pop. Tiny random thing, and hopefully that is helpful to you. There's a whole other list of them.
Regardless of how you feel about pop music or soda pop, you do not want random pops in your songs where they're not supposed to be.
Yes. Anything to add, my gents?
Yeah, definitely if like loudness is a priority for you and very clean mix downs, definitely go in and do all of that for sure. I think freezing and flattening in general is just a great way to get more control out of your sounds, like in a context like that, or through cutting reverb tails, reversing tails, anything, especially with space, is what I like to freeze and flatten. And manipulate any like weird reverbs. If you could like texturize a reverb or something, stuff like that is really cool to me. It's like when the song comes alive the most. So yeah, there's a lot of really cool stuff you could do freeze flattening wise. So I'm give a second to that.
Yeah, I think.
Go for it.
I was just gonna say like, what I also used to like use a utility and automate the mute on when I knew that there would be a weird tail on it, that also creates a pop. So if you're OCD like me and trying to get your master really loud, that's fine for like the draft. If you're just trying to work quick, you're not done with the sound, like automate a mute on at the end of the sound when you know it's going to be messy. But when you go to bounce it, turn that utility with the mutes off, and then just like actually go through and do what I was talking about, because it will get rid of the pop entirely.
Yeah, or just add that utility to your track and just like automate the volume to go down really, really fast and not actually at a vertical angle instead of doing a mute automation. Because yeah, I've definitely had some problems having to go back in and redo my automations when I realized like, oh, that's fucking me up. So I just stopped doing it that way for the most part.
Yeah. The other thing I've realized too is that even on a bass that I think should play the same every time, like if you have something like a chorus that is not BPM synced, like every time you play, it's actually in a slightly different position of that chorus effect. And so like freezing it, you might like get a certain version that's 1% different than the thing you're thinking you're getting. And so like freezing it, make sure that it doesn't change ever again. Like now you know what you're working with, and you can EQ that specific thing that's always going to be the same. I mentioned it on the podcast before, but I had to deal with this MIDI jitter thing. It was just such a pain in the ass. And freezing and flattening, or just like recording out a group of instruments and then like, you know, maybe recording a loop of it 4 times and picking your favorite, like that solves it as well.
Yeah.
But when you're finishing a song, it really goes a long way in both aiding your decision-making process and the cleanliness of your song to do that process. And that first tip was extremely helpful for me to make sure I don't fuck that up. So tip number 2.
Wait. Real quick.
Yes.
I just wanted to throw in also, if you're asking yourself, why would I bother doing this? I don't know what MIDI jitter is. Let's get to MIDI jitter. But also, you just get a bunch of processing power back if you turn shit into audio.
True.
If you're like at the end of your project and your CPU is struggling, something like, man, I haven't adjusted that. It sounds great. I haven't like adjusted any of the settings on there forever. It is exactly what it is. I need to finish the song and I need to bring out my mastering chain. Like, yeah, flatten some shit. Hit save as, freeze and flatten shit, and then you're just working with an audio file that takes almost no CPU to read. And then you can add more effects to your project if you need.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. But yeah,
that's
give me
actually
the cliff notes on MIDI jitter in case I missed that episode.
Okay, yeah. So MIDI jitter, essentially a MIDI note in your computer is information that is supposed to be processed at that specific moment in time, right? And if you get a really complicated project with a really complicated patch and MIDI that's, you know, potentially triggering more than one thing, like for example, in this case, the reason it was a problem, and normally it's never a problem. Like most people listening to this have probably never had this happen, and it doesn't matter. And it's the only time it's mattered to me, but it's because I was triggering multiple versions of Serum effects from the same MIDI note. And the tiny differences, it's like a plucky sound with a bunch of distortion on it. And I was like triggering other envelopes of distortion and effects with the same MIDI note, assuming that it's all the same, until I was beating my head against the wall, figuring out why I couldn't get this sound right, and realized when I was doing an A/B on something that I was changing, that any given time I played the sound, it would be like a range of 5 decibels different for the peak of the sound on the meter in Ableton. Changing nothing, just playing it back multiple times, it would be between 5 decibels different, depending on what, like just a random chance of how it worked out that time. And so that was creating a huge issue with me actually getting both the timing of the notes and the percussive nature of the transient of that sound dialed in. So basically, MIDI jitter is the fact that your computer is putting in the information of when that note should happen. And because it's inputting that information, it's not always perfect, especially when triggering other things. And so flattening to audio gets rid of that processing of information to tell it when to happen. It's just always going to happen at that same point. Hopefully that was a good explanation.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Tip
Yeah.
2.
Tip 2. So your CPU comment was a perfect segue.
Hey.
I think this actually might be the most helpful thing for me in the later stages of a project that I have come across. And it's really simple, but not something that you'd ever think to do, at least that I never thought to do. So when I put my mastering chain on a track at the end, and I don't bounce my whole mix to one stem and then try to master it, because there's always shit I need to adjust after the mastering chain is on, and I hate opening the project again, and I hate bouncing stems and then mastering like that. That sucks. Like, I'll just flatten everything to audio if I needed to and then put the master chain on. But what I realized is that my master chain, which used to be pretty short, like 5 plugins, and is now more like 8 or 9, potentially 10. The thing that bricks my computer on that mastering chain is the fact that I have every plugin on that chain at maximum oversampling, because it's your master. You're going to put it on the highest quality setting for every single one of those plugins, right? For instance, FabFilter Multiband has oversampling between off 2x and 4x. Pro L has a range of oversampling.
Up to 32x.
Yes. The standard Pro L that I still use only goes to 4x.
Yeah, Pro L2 has
not
more.
Not important. It's fine, but
It's fine.
Whatever it is, you're gonna put it at the max on your master, right? Every time. And throughout those plugins, having everything processing all of the information in your song on that multiplied facet basically is, I found out it was the reason my master chain normally bricks my project. So what I started doing is just turning off the oversampling on the master chain when I needed to like work on something, like I needed to unfreeze something, like change something about a patch or whatever. When I needed to do something CPU intensive, I would turn off all the oversampling and then go back and start working on it. And that basically led to me always leaving the oversampling off as I was working and then turning it on when I bounced the track. But what I realized is that every plugin in my master chain, and I don't know if this is 100% true for the plugins that you use, but every plugin on my master chain, I was able to configure the oversampling button to a slider and then macro that to one knob at the beginning of the master chain. So now I just have an oversampling knob at the beginning of the master chain that I can turn off when I'm working on the song and then turn on when I bounce the song. It saves both CPU, allows me to like continue my workflow without bouncing stuff that I'm not done working on yet. And in general, just at the end of that song, that last 5%, when your computer starts glitching out and it like really sucks to work on, it's made a huge difference in being able to actually like keep the process moving forward. So hopefully that's helpful as well.
100%. Yeah. Oversampling is a good idea in your mastering chain, but I feel you. If I try to run everything oversampled, my shit lags and stutters, especially with that 32x. Good God.
Oh my God, yeah. For me, it's so I use the invisible limiter at the end of my chain, and that goes up to 16x, and that when that's at 16, my computer just gets bricked. So
Sheesh.
It's not 32 like Pro L2 apparently, but yeah, oversampling. Basically, hit configure, press the button in your plugin, it should bring a slider down into the right hand side of your plugin in Ableton, and then you can macro that to one knob in your master chain and be able to turn all of it on and off. So you just flip that baby on when you go to bounce, and you get the maximum quality and save your CPU when you're working.
And I want to just like touch on oversampling, what and why, real quick. Like, so the reason that most sample rates are at like 44,000 hertz is because that's over double what the human range of hearing is. So that when you've got a super high end, like 20K sound, and it has a positive and a negative part of its cycle on the wave, that way, even stuff that's that high can fit into multiple samples so that you're getting that up down. But when we're downsampling from 32-bit floating point, which your DAW is compiling everything in, down to probably 16-bit, 24 at least, but 16-bit, you're losing literally half of the amplitude information from your file. Like, so you're going to get a lot less. And digital artifacts can happen at that stage where I've seen it on videos where it like kind of shows how like as the sound kind of like rolls off, it can hit the top end of your sample rate and then kind of bounce back down, cascade back down in a way that causes digital artifacts in those frequencies. And you can get weird buzzes and whines and aliasing and stuff. So when you turn that oversampling up, it actually moves that wall above the human hearing spectrum way up, so that there's no way that any of those digital artifacts can come back down into the audible sound spectrum.
Interesting.
That is my like very low budget. I watched a YouTube video about this explanation, but yeah, if you really want to dive in, there's a bunch of good YouTube videos out there. And if you don't want to dive in, just take our word for it. Oversampling when you're about to hit export is a good idea.
That's awesome. I knew oversampling had something to do with the fact that like it goes above the normal range of what you would look at on an EQ, but I didn't actually know what it was doing, and that makes a whole lot of sense. Especially like how it creates the artifacts, like it's interpolating data at a lower resolution essentially, and so it just becomes more. It's like creating clicks and pops. Like if it goes from something all the way completely flat down to another thing, it's going to create unwanted action. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yep. Cool. Oversampling. What's tip 3, Rip Kitty? Tip
3, and this is the only one that I'm not sure if we've actually talked about on this podcast before, but it's about in Ableton, the way that it uses CPU is not like every track like basically combined loads the CPU in a certain way. Ableton is only able to use one CPU core per track. And most people have a computer with multiple cores. Like, I think that's pretty much accepted fact at this point.
Yeah, it's pretty standard.
Yeah. And Ableton only uses one core per track. So typically, if you're having CPU issues, it's because one track, and for me, normally it's my vocal chain, is using too much processing. And so knowing that, you don't have to necessarily go through and freeze and flatten everything, but that one track, you have 30 plugins on, like that's the one you should freeze and flatten. Or alternatively, you could split the plugin load on that track into multiple tracks by busing the audio into another track. And for instance, if you have 30 plugins on one track, create a second bus that has basically the regular track has the first 10 plugins, the second bus has the next 10, and the third has the final 10. And that will split effectively the CPU load of that one track that's bricking your computer into 3.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And that can also make a huge difference if it's something like your vocals that you're still replacing takes or like messing with the timing of something. You can't, and you're not like ready to print the whole thing. You're not done with it. That can really make a big difference as well for your CPU.
Or, just buy a better
That's
computer.
really cool.
You just got $3,000 laying around, don't you? Everybody?
Yeah.
Everybody?
I think everyone listening to this would love a new computer. If you don't already have one, like
I would love a new computer.
I would love a new computer. And
Would you love a new computer, Luke?
Yeah.
Yeah.
This one's doing pretty good.
I'm happy
not
with how
mad
mine
at
is putting up with.
But you'd also love one still.
I would take one, yeah.
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 But I think most people listening to this would also agree, you got what you got right now, and anything to make what you got work is helpful.
Amen. Love is what I got. Remember that.
I said remember that, exactly. Random, next tip, random
Don't get angry
Ableton
when your mom
thing.
smokes pot.
Huh?
That's the next tip, is don't get angry when your mom smokes pot,
No.
hits the bottle, and goes back to the rock.
No, it's I don't cry when my dog runs away. I don't get angry at the bills I have to pay. I don't get angry when my mom smokes pot. Hits the bottle and goes back to the rock.
Fucking and fighting, it's all the same. But living with Louie dogs, the only way to stay
Is
sane.
that what that line says?
Yeah, it's his dog. It was his dog. The dog's long dead for sure.
Oh
But
my God.
probably outlived Bradley. Rest in peace, man.
Wow.
Heroin's a hell of a drug. Also, tip number 3, don't do heroin.
True. Good tip.
Yeah.
I
Good
think
tip.
so. I'm
Good tip.
sticking on that zero heroin
Yeah.
train.
Me too.
It's actually tip 3.
Tip 3.
Those
We're
are-
actually on tip. We're on
Wasn't
tip
that
4 now.
Yeah.
Don't
Holy
do
shit.
heroin or get mad when your mom smokes
Or yeah,
pot.
tip 5.
Yeah. Tip 5. This one's just like a random Ableton thing, but I had a channel that had like so many lanes of automation on like multiple groups, and I didn't want to keep them all open all the time, but I also knew that there was like so many little automations buried in groups that if I had to like go through and make sure I could see all of them when I wanted to adjust things, like I'd forget some. And I randomly stumbled across this. This might be obvious to some people, but it wasn't to me. When you have an automation lane and you hit the down arrow to like pop it into its own lane, you can right click on that track and say add automation lane for every automated parameter or something like that. And it'll populate every single thing that you've automated into its own little track. And then you're not worried about forgetting something that you've automated that you can't figure out why this thing is doing this thing and it's doing this thing and it's killing you. And you're like, am I forgetting something? Like, just do that and you can make sure all that shit, you can see all of it. And then
That
you can
is
actually
such a
just
good
like,
piece of advice. I didn't know that.
that shit happens.
In Reason, like, there's no way to not have separate automation lanes. So just seeing one at a time when I'm using Ableton always like confused me and angered me. And I'm like, first off, like Reason, it's like you've got your track and then every automation for that track is just like right below it. And then you can like hit an arrow that either like collapses them all into one skinny lane that shows you a little like representation of multi-lanes, or it opens up and you can just see them all. And then you can like go in and like fine detail, automate them, edit them one at a time. But like you can just see them all at once and be like, oh yeah, that's what's fucking me up. So yeah, that's great. That's a great advice. I actually have not seen any producers that I collabed with utilize that function. I don't know if that means they don't know it exists and just were like, I can just do it one at a time.
It's one of those things that because it only appears when you right click on an automation lane, it doesn't give you the option if you right click on the track itself, even on the automation dropdown. That doesn't appear. It only appears when you right click on the automation lane. It's something you could easily miss. It's something that I've missed for damn near 10 years. And It's really helpful.
That's such
Another
a good
thing,
piece of advice. That's such
another
a good
thing,
piece of advice.
another thing that like you use every fucking time you work in Ableton, but I never actually really knew what it did or when to use what. I randomly had the Ableton little like info thing open in the bottom left, which I'm actually just gonna leave open from now on, because stuff like this, like, you think you know everything about what this thing is doing, but you might not know everything, and there could be something really beneficial that info thing could tell you. So I'm just gonna leave that thing open. I'm not too good for it. I thought I knew everything. I thought I was too good for it. I'm not anymore, because on the Complex Pro Warp mode, that thing you use all the fucking time, you probably fuck with the formants. You know what that does. Formants at 100 maintains the original formants. Formants at 0 basically makes it complex mode. What does the envelope do? When do you use it? How should you use it? You've probably fucked with it when you can't get the sound to be like what you want, and with limited results. That info window actually explained when to use which. For high-pitched sounds, drag that envelope like all the way down. And for low-pitched sounds, drag that envelope all the way up. Like, how the fuck has no one ever told me this? Like, and it works. Like, I was using it on like a higher pitched thing with like a lot of transient to it, and I was trying to figure out which warp mode is working the best, and I was trying to use like beats, play forward and stop, because that like preserves transients, and it was still sounding shitty. And I fucking happened to notice that the info window was open, and I zoomed over the envelope, and it said changes the spectral characteristics of the warping, low envelopes for high pitched sounds, high envelope values for low pitched sounds. And I was like, thank God, now I actually know what that does. And it worked. It worked. Like, it was by far the best warp mode for that thing. And I know we all do it. You're like, what sounds best? And you click through all of them except repitch, because it needs to be a certain pitch. And
yeah, repitch is a beast for its own set of reasons.
Yeah, repitch for drums, like hi-hats, drum fills, like anything that you're stretching for time, but the pitch isn't super important. Like your kick, probably don't do that. But when would you do that for a kick? It's a one shot you have in a MIDI, probably, or in audio. But
likely.
Complex Pro, that envelope, use 8. You just drag it down for high pitched stuff, drag it up for low pitched stuff. It's super helpful. Yeah. Woo. Let's see. The next thing that is somewhat related to warp modes. So, like, one thing that I'm constantly trying to do to like a kick drum sample in particular is like, you have a kick that you love that is perfect on the transient, has like a nice body and woomph, really hits, and then there's just like too much decay on that kick for the tempo that you have it at, or for the groove that you have. And so what I would always do is one of two things. I would put it on one shot mode and use the fade and try and get it right. And sometimes that works, but it sounds a little unnatural, especially when it's snapping between points. Like the spot that you want it to be is never actually where it ends up. And even if you turn snapping off, and because it's a fade that's going to 0, it won't create a pop, right? It should be fine. Like, it still sounds a little unnatural, unsatisfying. Like, it doesn't work that good. So then what I would do is like, I would convert the simpler to a sampler and create like a really meticulous volume envelope that's like shaped the exact ramp that I need and like is the exact length that I need. But even that left a little bit to be desired. And I didn't realize the thing that I've actually found to work best in 90% of situations on at least a kick drum when I'm trying to shorten it, in the simpler, just turn warp on, set it to beats, play forward and stop like you would do on a hi-hat loop that's too splashy and you want to make it more like clicky, and just turn that slider down. For whatever reason, the algorithm that they use in the beats, play forward and stop, when you pull that down, it's a really high fidelity way to shorten things, and it maintains the transient. Everything about the sound itself still sounds mostly like you wanted it, but you can make it shorter really easy without fucking the sound up. So yeah, in the simpler, there's a warp button that's unchecked normally. Just hit warp, turn the warp mode to beats, play forward and stop, and drag the value from 100 down to whatever you need. Should work great.
Wow, that's
Cool.
lit.
Yeah,
just
that
remi-
beats mode awesome.
Go for it. Yeah, that it reminds me of a trick I learned from Focus, who's a prominent hip hop producer, works for Aftermath. Has done like a lot of stuff for like Kendrick, Dr. Dre, Anderson .Paak. And a few years ago, I saw him do a clinic on like what he does on his drums. He uses Logic, and one of his things he does on his drums is use RVox, because he loves like the way, like the release of the compressor and like how it like the attack and release settings on the compressor. He says like just really work for his drums and how it controls drum tails.
Dude,
like, wow,
That
that's
makes
hilarious.
me feel so
I was
much
gonna say,
better
Tesco,
because
I
do
know
that.
you tell everyone to use RVox for compression, and I agree, it's a good compressor.
That makes me feel better because, yeah, some shit, man, it just, I don't know how to describe it, but it's just got a very specific sound to it. Like some jobs are just meant for RVox.
Yeah, man.
I believe it.
Oh,
Okay, so I have two more, I think.
Woo!
So the next one is so in FabFilter on linear phase mode, there is a resolution drop down, and I had never changed that and didn't think it really mattered too much. Because when you hover over it in FabFilter, it says low and medium should be more than enough for most EQ cases. And so I just remembered that and then never changed it. But then I was having trouble removing some resonances in a vocal, and happened to just say, fuck it, I'm going to change that resolution. And when you're notching out stuff at like high Q values, turning
That's
that
really skinny for all you don't know.
yeah.
Skinny
So
EQ note.
yeah, notching out stuff skinny. And I even read the whole thing from FabFilter again. It doesn't specify what a high Q value is. So I just assume anytime I'm over 8, like I'm going to turn the resolution up if my CPU can handle it. Because it does a cleaner job of removing just that without the shit around it. And that can be really, really beneficial in certain cases. When it's just, you love the sound, but like there's just this one spot, and sometimes it can happen when it plays with other instruments. It becomes noticeable because like the frequency buildup, but like sometimes you just got to notch out this one little thing and you don't want to change anything else about the sound. Using a higher resolution helps you achieve that. So that's helpful. And that's something I use all the time and never fucked with.
Wow.
Also,
I didn't
just
know about that.
like
Yeah, I knew there was a higher resolution modes. I just
yeah.
I usually also just leave it on medium.
Also, just random. If you didn't know, this is one huge suggestion from myself. Like I used to just use linear phase mode to high pass things with bass information. So like if I was high passing my bass group or my sub at like 25 hertz, you don't have low rumble or whatever, I just always used linear phase because that's what you should use, right? Well, linear phase actually affects the transient response of a sound, basically your trade-off is linear phase keeps the phase coherency, but it has this thing called pre-ring, which essentially makes the transient less impactful. And so what I realize is even though being in phase should be more important, I won't use linear phase on my master. I won't use linear phase on a bass group, on a sub, anything like that. Even though it's should be more important to keep it in phase. If I need transient response, which obviously your master, you need transient response, and your sub, like some subs, it doesn't matter, and you want it to be in phase, cool. But if you have a sub that is like trying to have some transient, use natural phase instead, and just A/B it, see if it matters for the transient on the thing that you're doing. But some rhythms that I do, like I really accentuate, like I put like a pitch envelope on the sub to like make it like instead of just like underneath the bass. And when it's doing that, I need that transient to be hitting, and so I don't use linear phase for that. Stuff you should know.
I did not know that part.
Pro Q.
Yeah, I think
good advice.
Yeah. And like, if you're doing any of these things and you're like, oh, I've been fucking it up this whole time, like, it's fine. Like, these are all things that I've just learned, and it's been fine.
Yeah.
The whole, like, it's not ruining your stuff. But I remember someone said in like one of the mixing things that I was watching, like early on, like a good mix is not like one good decision you made. It can be ruined by one bad decision, but a great mix, a perfect mix, is the result of 10,000 1% or like 10,000 tiny decisions that are all adding up to the right thing. So like any one bad decision or 100 of that 10,000 is not gonna kill you. Like none of this stuff is actually life changing as far as like make or break. Like linear phase versus natural phase, like it's not going to ruin your song. It's fine. But all this stuff is helpful to know if you want to have all those 1% to get to the perfect mix. The last one is I didn't save the best for last or anything. I probably should have done that. But
they already listened to the podcast. We got them.
Yeah.
Sucks to be you nerds.
Or it's great to be you because you're learning all this nerdy shit and you're like, oh my God, this is my favorite episode. I'm learning all this shit that I never would have learned if they didn't do a stupid random episode about random shit. So you're welcome.
That's the title now. Stupid random episode about random shit.
Perfect.
It's not. It's probably not. I'm just going to like look into the SEO.
Yeah.
Nerds.
Yeah, exactly. It's all nerd shit.
Yeah.
All
Production
top
is
level nerd
nerdy.
shit.
Engineering is nerdy.
Speaking of nerd
be
shit,
a rapper. Unless you're in nerdcore. Nerdcore is pretty nerdy.
So Soothe, a plugin we talk about on this podcast semi-regularly. One that I use all the time, like all the time. I'm sure you guys do too.
Fairly often.
And I keep thinking that I know fucking everything about this plugin, and I keep learning that actually I'm still getting better with it. One thing is, for instance, specifically on guitars, I realized this, but it's anything that has differing information in the left and right side. So guitars are a perfect example because I have two double track, or you have it double track. So you have one all the way left, one all the way right. They're different takes, so they don't phase, but you're using Soothe on a guitar take that's double tracked, and you're like, stuff's still poking out on the left and right. Completely unlink it. There is basically like a stereo link option, and you can choose between, well, I'll get to that. On something that's double tracked, it comes factory at left, right side split information. Just pull that link all the way down to 0 on guitars. Just do it. Like if you want to maintain like a little bit more center image, I guess, or whatever, like pull it up to 20 or whatever. But I've found that like if you really have like a distorted thing that needs precision on the left and right, just completely unlink it. You'll actually have to use less Soothe to get the desired result, because it's actually acting on the things that you need it to, rather than assuming the sum is the same, where like guitar takes are wildly different on the left and right. But when I learned that, I realized that a lot of other shit that I'm using Soothe on has use cases for this, like your bass group or whatever. Like even a bass sound that has like chorus and hyperdimension before a distortion has like wildly different shit on the left and right. Like unlink that bitch if you need to. And if you have like, for instance, a vocal that is dead center, and then you have like a distorted reverb that's out wide, switch it to mid side and unlink that. Because then it'll soothe the sides on the distorted thing and just grab from the middle what it needs to. But that has helped immensely. Also, bonus tip with Soothe, for something like guitars, turn the selectivity down. I always used to think turning both of those up like carved more out, but like potentially made more artifacts. Like for something that's noisy, like hissy or like scratchy, like turn the selectivity down. You could turn the sharpness up if you need to, but turn the selectivity down if you have something that's noisy and scratchy.
Makes sense, because noise has a ton of frequencies in it.
Yeah. So
I want to add to this whole stereo unlinking discussion. There's a lot of plugins that have stereo unlink features, or even like mid-side compared to stereo features. And there is a lot of use cases. There's a reason these have these options. And I want the humans to start thinking about this when you're using stuff. Let's say a compressor or multiband compressor. There is a stereo unlink, like on all the FabFilter stuff we've been talking about. Same with Pro L. There's stereo link and unlink knobs on Pro L. Like, is your track either your master track that you put that on or your individual track? Is there stereo information? If yes, and different things are happening left and right, does it make more sense to stereo unlink that? Probably. Because, like you said, different things are happening in different ears. And if something in the right ear triggers what's going on in the left ear, then it doesn't actually like change that ratio in a positive way that you're putting this plugin on for it. So like, and A/B, always A/B. Like, listen, did this make a difference? Can I hear it at all? Does it make a good difference? Does it make a bad difference? And I'm actually better off using the other way. Like, listen for that kind of stuff. It'll help train your ear and maybe help your stereo image be cleaner, and your tracks come out sounding that 1% better.
Yeah. Also, to tack on that, a good rule of thumb for, like, for instance, a FabFilter multiband on your master, like normally I will completely unlink stuff at the high end, and as it moved towards the low end, I will link more. So like 100 hertz and below, I'll have fully linked. And then, you know, maybe like 100 to 400 hertz or whatever that band is, I'll have like, you know, 80% linked. And all the way at the high end, I have 0% completely unlinked. But that's kind of how I have found good results with that. So
I would be interested to hear what it would sound like comparatively, like having two, so like Pro MBs or whatever you're using for that, like back to back, like on an A/B switch. And because, like, you know, I've seen like Ill Gates do a lot of his stereo image checking where he wants it like super narrow in the, you know, narrow in the sub, but then those low mids wide and that Christmas tree shape that he talks about. So like getting more stereo width in the low mids. But again, like, these are the questions to ask yourself when you're finishing songs. Like, what actually sounds better? What can I A/B here? Like, I've been doing it this way. What if I did it that way? Can I like confirm that how I'm doing it is working more, or maybe by happy accident I'll find a better solution?
No, that is a really good point. Especially so, like, just real quick. For instance, on like Ozone, like the stereo imaging, I remember Dylan saying that, and I have tried like making the low mids, like bumping the width there and then turning the width on the high end down. And for the music that I make, for whatever reason, that just creates mud in the low mids, and the highs need the width for the clarity. I don't know.
Yeah.
So yeah, that it is a good point though, because it's not like what I said with that ramp is dogma. Like for you, a Christmas tree shape of narrow at the sub and then wide and then narrow again at the high end might work better.
Yeah.
But just know that these things exist and that you can use them to shape how your song sounds.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I think just the last thing, just being that, like, no matter what you heard on a podcast, hey, or a YouTube video or a tutorial or whatever, like, test it.
Yeah.
Double check it. Like, there's so many things that we all did starting out that we're just like, oh, this is the way it's done because that video said so. And then 5 years later, you find out that that's been causing the problem you've been fighting in every song. Like, oh, fuck. Well,
Yep.
I didn't even bother to A/B whether that made things sound better. I just started blindly doing it. I just put it as the default in my template and never checked. So
That's so true. I used to just
science
do
experiments.
Exactly. I used to just do stuff and it made it sound better because it got louder. I thought it was better. The better I've gotten to avoid making bad decisions in a mix, just A/B it a bunch of times. I'll even A/B stuff that I'm not sure on that I did the day before. And like one time out of 10, I'm like, actually, that's not actually what I need to do.
Maybe my ears were tired when I made that decision.
So,
But
yeah, hopefully the stuff was helpful.
I think it was. I learned some good shit. That's for sure.
Cool.
MIDI jitter.
MIDI
Good
jitter.
old
Watch
MIDI
out
jitter.
for the MIDI jitter. He's coming.
All right. Well, peace,
Well,
humans.
Bye, kids.
Peace among worlds. Till next week, baby.
I like it.
All right, humans. Thank you so much for being here with us. Truly appreciate y'all. Make sure to subscribe, drop the comments, follow, whatever you need to do. If you got a question, please drop comments. We always love hearing from y'all when we show up without a guest, because some of y'all have come up with some of our favorite episodes. So just drop a comment on YouTube or send us something on social media and holla at your boys. Make sure to go bump that Rip Kenny I'm Okay Alone, or pre-save it if this is within a couple days of this album dropping or this episode dropping. Freudian slip. His album's coming. I'm excited. The Human Music Podcast Song of the Week Spotify playlist has a link down there too, so you can hear all the songs we've featured. Support our sponsors while you're there. Dojo TV, free producer live stream classes from the Dojo Senseis, and we do our podcast about every other week over there live, so that's exciting. Tesco's Patreon, where you can get access to his educational content, project files, behind-the-scenes footage, access to his Discord track feedback, and private lessons. The weekly download, where you can learn from Ill Gates and his weekly private group lessons, and get access to over 250 more episodes in the archive for just $20 a month. And guest practices, where you can learn at the Approach Institute. And your first class is free over there. You can learn some amazing engineering skills from Seth Drake and Clint Moody. And then visit thehumanmusicpodcast.com to find us on different socials and different streaming sites and get our free sound packs and all that good stuff. Find all our sponsors over there too. All right, y'all. Till next week. Peace. And peace among worlds. Ha 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 ha.